Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Overview and Scrutiny meeting on the 2nd of November at 2 o'clock. My name is Councillor Lawrence Veer, and I'm the Vice Chair of BCP. I have a presiding note to read out, which I will do so now. The Constitution requires that a chairman of the committee will be appointed from those members of the body present. In accordance with the advice from the monitoring officer and common law, the committee is required to decide who shall preside over the election of chair. In accordance with the procedures previously agreed as Vice Chairman of the Council, I have been selected to preside over the meeting for the purposes of chairing items 1 through to 3 on the agenda, only until a Chairman of the Board is elected. This process was agreed previously by the leader of the Conservative Group and the leader of the Unity Alliance. So thank you for that. So with no further ado, I will step into housekeeping, if I may pass over to Democratic Services.
Thank you, Councillor Veer. I'll just read out a brief housekeeping notice. Please note that this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum period of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to do so by the Chairman. Always turn on your video function when invited to speak. Please state your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Some people may need to dial into the meeting and will therefore not have the benefit of visual. Please mute your microphone when you are not talking. If you would like to speak on an item, please do so by utilising the raise your hand function in the bar at the top of the Teams window. The messaging bar should not be used unless you are raising a point of order or providing the wording for a motion. Please remember that this panel is visible to all and subject to public information requests. If at any point you would like to speak again, please use the raise your hand feature. The Chairman will ask each member in turn how they wish to vote. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So if we step into item 1, followed by item 2. So item 1 is apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Millie Earle, and she is being substituted for this meeting by Councillor Tony Trent.
Thank you very much for that. Moving on, excuse me. Moving on to item 3, election of chairman to the board. I will now ask for members of the board to raise their hand if they have, if they wish to propose, and also second. I have first Councillor Mike Cox has appeared. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to propose Councillor Vicky Slade to be chair. I think it's important that this committee has a member of the opposition chairing it, and also I can't think of anybody with any more knowledge or experience. I think hers is second to none, so I think she should be the chair of this committee. So I'd like to propose her, please.
Thank you, Councillor Mike Cox. May I then go to the next person that raised their hand was Councillor Dave Kelsey, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I nominate Councillor Stephen Bartlett, please? Again, he is an independent person. I think he would be extremely good at monitoring this panel, and I think we should have an independent person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So at the moment we have 2 proposers. Moving on to Councillor Jackie Edwards.
Thank you. I would like to second Councillor Steve Bartlett to be chair of this committee. I think he will be a very fair and able chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards, for that. And I have one final hand showing, which is Councillor Chris Rigby.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to second Councillor Vicky Slade, please. With her experience as the previous leader, I feel she'd be best placed to offer the best scrutiny as things stand at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. So from that, we now have a contested election for the position of Chair of Overview and Scrutiny. So what we will do now is to members of the public, we will now go into a closed session. So you will see a holding screen while a secret ballot takes place. and on the return, the result will be. So thank you very much, and please bear with us while we have our secret ballot. Thank you. Welcome back to the meeting. We now have the results of the election in for the position of Chair of Overview and Scrutiny. So I'm going to pass over to Mr. Richard Jones now with the result.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I have the result of the election of Chairman for ONS Board for the remainder of 2020-21. The results as follows: Councillor Stephen Bartlett, 9 votes. Councillor Vicky Slade, 6 votes. There were no abstentions. Councillor Bartlett is elected Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. I will now pass over to the newly elected Councillor Stephen Bartlett, and congratulations on your result. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fear. Can I just pay tribute to Councillor Phil Broadhead, the previous chair of this committee, who's done an outstanding job, and in whose shoes it's going to be very difficult to follow, but I will certainly try my best. So we now move to agenda item 4, which is the election of the vice chairman. So could I call upon anybody for nominations for chair, vice chair, and also for any seconders? Thank you, members. Okay, Councillor Dwayne Farr, I think you're the first hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to nominate Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Farr. And now we have Councillor Mike Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations. I'd like to nominate Vicky Slade to be vice chair. I think it's very important to have a member of the opposition at this level. In fact, I think it's vital, and it would be very disappointing if it wasn't anybody else other than Vicky. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Mark Howell.
Yeah, I'd like to second Councillor Vicky Slade for exactly the same reasons that Councillor Cox set out.
Thank you. Councillor Dion, you wish to speak?
Yes, I'd like to second Councillor Tony O'Neill. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I'll hand over to Mr. Jones, I think, for the ballot to be conducted, please. Thank you. Welcome back to the overview and scrutiny meeting. Can I call upon Richard Jones to give the results of the vote, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I have the results of the election of Vice Chairman for the Overview and Scrutiny Board for the remainder of 2020-21. The results as follows: Councillor Tony O'Neill, 9 votes. Councillor Vicky Slade, 6 votes. There were no abstentions. Councillor Tony O'Neill is elected Vice Chairman of the committee, of the board. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. May I offer my congratulations to Councillor O'Neill for your election. With that, I'll move on to agenda item 5, which is declarations of interest. I think I'll start this one off myself. I do have a local interest in that I am a director of BH Live Enterprises Limited, and as such, I took part in the working group looking at the activities of BH Live recently, which is agenda item number 14. But I think I can still take part in that particular debate when we come to it. It is in closed session. So are there any further declarations of interest, please? I see I've got Councillor Jackie Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm also a director of BH Live, but I didn't take part in the working group.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edwards. Moving to, are there any more, just to make sure? No more? Okay, we'll move on. Agenda item 6 and 6A, minutes of an action sheet of the meetings held on the 21st of September 2020. First of all, could I just ask members if they are content with the accuracy of the minutes of the 2 o'clock meeting? I see Councillor Farquhar, you've raised your hand.
Thank you, yes, Chair. Just to inform you that I also took part on the working groups relating to BH Live. Okay,
thank you. Noted. So just going back to the agenda item 6 and the minutes for accuracy of the 2 o'clock meeting on the 21st. I see no dissent from that. Could I just ask if there are any issues to raise on that particular meeting? No, let's just move then to the 6 o'clock meeting. Accuracy. Any issues to raise? No, okay. We'll just move on then to the action sheet associated with that particular meeting. So I'm just trying to find an action sheet.
Page 23, Chairman.
Page 23, just a second, thank you. Right, yes, there was an outstanding action 113, Carter's expansion project update. This was that there was a financial element associated with the expansion, the Carter expansion project, and at the time we had Councillor Mike Brook and Councillor Nicola Green, who were on the overview and scrutiny panel, and it had been agreed that they would come back to the panel if the board if it was required. I'm not sure that we do need to continue with that action. Would anybody like to add to that action? I also note that this would also be looked at, I think probably by one of the scrutiny boards. Yes, the Children's Overview and Scrutiny Committee would probably be looking at this also. And so I think we could probably take that action out unless there's any dissent to that. Sorry, Councillor Vicky Slade.
Yeah, this was put on specifically to look at the financial issues, the strategic issues being dealt with by Children's, and reading the MTFP report, it just references a single line that this project is working to budget. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't. Why, if it was deemed necessary to have it on, I don't see any reason why we should take it off when no one's actually done anything to scrutinise it. So I would like to see this put back on so that we can see whether some detail around what has happened, because nothing has changed. The project isn't complete. So I'd like to keep it on and ask for somebody to liaise with members of Children's Services to bring a paper back on this next time.
There was no previous plan to raise a separate paper for this before. It was just that sort of informally the members of the board who were actually part of the overview and the Children's Overview Scrutiny would just bring it back as a matter of interest. Are you proposing that we do actually need a paper to put before this committee?
It does state on the that we continue to scrutinise it and if necessary bring a report back to the ONS board. So okay. That's sort of what 9 months ago now. I think it would be good for us to hear what the financial implications of that one are, just to make sure that it is genuinely on track, and then we can rule it as complete. Otherwise it runs the risk of it not being, and we haven't actually done our job properly.
Okay, I'll leave it on there for the time being, and I think a bit later on we'll be talking the future work plan and some thoughts for that, and we can probably discuss it then as well. Thank you. So so the action plan from there. Just looking at the rest now. Item. Oh, I see. One seems to have changed. Please bear with me just a second, please. Okay, I think we can probably move on now to agenda item 7, public issues. And I don't know that any public issues have been raised. Could I go to Democratic Services, please, for any inputs from the public, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that we haven't received any public questions, statements or petitions for this meeting. Thank you. Thank
you very much. We'll move on to item 8, items requested by councillors for scrutiny. And in accordance with the Constitution, the board has received a request from a councillor for 2 items of scrutiny, those being road maintenance across BCP area and tree maintenance across the BCP area. I'd like to invite, there are 3 people that would like to speak on this. So the first one is Councillor Trent. And then we have Mr. Larry Austin, who's the Director for the Environment. And thirdly, Councillor Mark Anderson, who's the portfolio holder for the Environment, Cleansing and Waste. So could I invite Councillor Trent, who raised these items initially, to speak, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I raised the issue of road maintenance at the last meeting when we were looking at the annual spending on road maintenance, and the reason why I raised it is initially because my experience, at least in the area I represent, and I picked it up from other nearby areas, is that the public are asking lots of questions about the nature and quality of the road resurfacing programme, and I've more recently had one which I've shared with 1 or 2 members of the administration, but one bounced back on the similar problems with the quality of work that's going on in resurfacing pavements. And these problems have been going back a long way, and I think we need to ask the question as to whether we're getting the best value for money with what's being done, whether we're getting enough life out of what we do. I'm assuming there are savings in the methods that are being used, but it would be very useful if members have the opportunity to look at these things and consider these things. Since then, in response to a query about some issues with pavement maintenance, it's been revealed to me that there is a review of road maintenance and methods, etc., actually going on at the moment, which is going to report back at some time in the not too distant future, to presumably to Cabinet. And this would seem to be the ideal time for members to get amongst the issue and to ask, is what we're doing working for the best value? Are there things that could be improved? Just basically doing a proper scrutiny job on it. So I'm suggesting that that's looked at. The other subject, trees, that's one where I know there's been a lot of uncertainty as to who's responsible for what, and certainly I've got a bit of casework which now goes back almost 2 years, where tree issues have been bounced back and forth. And again, I think this is the opportune time to review that, because we have got a serious challenge ahead of us to meet our climate change targets and our zero carbon or carbon neutral targets. We have got to plant one hell of a lot of trees, and I think actually reviewing the policies, how we maintain what we've got, how we advise residents about what they ought to be planting or not planting in their gardens, and you know, looking at the whole issue. And I believe that both of those are items that could be looked at, scrutinised properly in a proper scrutiny function, rather than the rather shallow one we've got at the moment. But that's for another meeting on another day. And as I say, I think those are important things to submit, and they're both timely. So I would like to suggest that that's the way forward.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Trent. I think you've, in your talk, you've suggested that there is already a paper coming to Cabinet, which would give us an opportunity to review that paper anyway. Is that right?
Can I just intervene? That is a review, which I'm assuming it would come to Cabinet, but members being able to look at these things in advance of them actually going to Cabinet, that to me is all about. I think here we have a sort of live issue, affects everyone all over the conurbation. This is a golden opportunity to engage members of the wider council in looking at something which affects almost everyone's wards, rather than actually look at something which has been pre-prepared. I think we should be part of the review of the situation before it actually is a paper. You know, I think at the moment we're doing scrutiny back to front. We're scrutinising the aftermath and not scrutinising things as they go along. Okay,
Councillor Cox, I see you've got your hand up, but we've got another two speakers wanting to talk on these issues. Would you like to wait until they've spoken, or would you prefer to speak now?
I prefer to speak now, if that's all right, because I suspect they'll be speaking on specifics. I'd like to back up what Councillor Trent has said, because one thing that this committee is supposed to be about is overview and scrutiny. We've done an awful lot of scrutiny in the last year and virtually no overview, as far as I can see. And what I believe Councillor Trent is proposing is to do an overview of a specific service area, which I think I applaud, because I think it's a very good idea, and it's one that's very close to the residents which we represent. And so I would suggest that we do more overview in this particular instance rather than scrutiny. It's all very well scrutinising and or criticising papers that come to committee, come to the cabinet, but this is a far more constructive approach to try and look at the affairs of the council. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, Councillor Cox, and in fact I think we probably will be talking a bit more about this aspect under agenda item 10, which is the development of the Overview and Scrutiny Board and how we deal with those sorts of things. But I see I've got Councillor Dave Kelsey, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, at the moment, we are just about to undertake a governance review on quite a few items. And I think Councillor Trent is quite right. We may need to look at that under this. So once that governance review is taking place, I'm sure something can come out of this that we can have further looks at that particular subject.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hall. You there, Councillor Hall? Okay, it's not responding for the moment. So could I invite Mr. Austin, Director of the Environment, to speak on these issues? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, before I speak, may I ask that Councillor Anderson maybe just comes in first from a portfolio holder perspective, if that's okay?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. And first of all, congratulations on your election, and to Councillor Trent and his election. I'm sure you'll both do a very good job. I'd also like to thank Councillor Trent for raising these issues, because as biodiversity is one of the areas under my portfolio, this was the first item I took up with Kate Ryan when I became the portfolio holder. So I'm actually setting up a workshop on biodiversity, and I will be inviting all councillors to attend it once I've finally got it sorted out. I've also spoken to Natural England, Woodland Trust, and various other bodies to get them to come and talk, which I think will cover not only tree management, but also the biodiversity, which is the ecological part of the climate and ecological emergency, which we declared last year. On the subject of road maintenance, I have some issues with road maintenance. I've had people commenting to me on various issues in the past. So I am also in the process of setting up a workshop on this as well. I have a meeting with Growth and Infrastructure to progress this further hopefully later this week, otherwise next week. And I have it covers both growth and infrastructure and the environment, because environment picks up the repairs while growth and infrastructure does the new work. So it has to be both parts, and I've been talking to both parts, and we're going to be looking at seeing how we can share evidence of what's going right, what's going wrong, linking up with suppliers to see what we can do to improve the work, the inconsistency of output quality, etc. And also, I think from the council's point of view, we want to try and see if there are any new or innovative methods that we can use. Now, I'm aware of several, including there's a company in Scotland, I believe, that creates a tarmac-like material from recycled plastics, and to see whether that might be of use to us. So there's a whole raft of things there that I would like to see covered, and I believe that members of this committee and any other councillor that would be interested should be invited. Now, with the COVID clampdown being happening over the weekend, I'm not in a position to give you any dates yet, but as soon as I do, I will most certainly let you, Chairman, and Democratic Services know, so we can invite people to it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson. Mr. Austin?
Thank you, Chair. Probably very little to add to what Councillor Anderson has said. I would certainly support involvement in any of those particular workshops, that type of activity. I think Councillor Anderson clearly explained that in terms of road maintenance, the issue clearly spans across both growth and infrastructure and environment. So if we're talking about surface treatment programs or resurfacing programs as a whole, generally they are developed and delivered by growth and infrastructure. with input as necessary from third-party contractors. So that's one area. And as Councillor Anderson clearly explained, environment pick up, if you like, the day-to-day maintenance activities. So we'd also welcome, any input or any improvements that can be made in that area. Certainly in terms of the tree strategy, the approach to meeting our carbon neutral ambitions, again, officers are just in the beginnings of trying to form a consolidated street strategy for BCP Council. But equally, and I just to pick up on Councillor Trent's very valid point about the need to plant many trees, actually as well, the biggest imperative is actually to reduce carbon in the first instance, and hopefully our annual report, which is coming to Cabinet in December, will actually sort of have a lot of detail about how we have done and how we are going to reduce carbon further going forward. But tree planting, tree strategy is also a crucially important piece of work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Austin. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Okay, it doesn't seem at the moment so we do, although Councillor Hall did put his hand up earlier on, and I don't know what's happened to him now. Yes, he's back again. Councillor Hall. Unfortunately, we seem to have no audio from him. Sorry, Councillor Hall, I can't hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Oh, good. Something's happened. Point out is that often the utilities come along, dig up our quality pavements, and then just replace it with tarmac. And it may be months afterwards before they put appropriate paving back. I think we should give them a maximum of 4 weeks to replace with the original type of paving. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Yeah, I think that's okay. We've got some more. Mr. Austin, did you want to come back on that?
Thank you, Chair. It was just simply to say, obviously, the utility works are governed by the New Roads and Street Works Act, so they have to work under that legislation, which again, that is overseen by officers within growth and infrastructure. There are certain timescales that utility companies must adhere to in terms of their works. But again, I think member insight to that would be most useful.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to raise something to support Tony Trent's suggestion that we do look at this as a separate piece of work, in that I raised with planning a couple of months ago the fact that every time somebody builds an extension, a new house, or a whole raft of new houses, they damage the roads and the pavements, and there is no automatic arrangement which allocates funding from either the community infrastructure levy or from something else that's charged to the developer to put that right. And that applies from a small extension right the way up. You've only got to look down most roads and see the state of it. And although I understand it could be rolled into the sill work, I think if we actually had a piece of work that looked at how extensive the problem is of perfectly good roads being regularly damaged, it might actually help us to inform that position. So I'd support any separate work being done to then inform a future paper that might come before Cabinet later.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Slade. Councillor Jackie Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. If we could just go back to trees for a minute, I would certainly like to see in the paper that they're doing, their strategy, some idea of the long-term maintenance of our trees, especially in my ward. We've got some very old trees, and they're being affected by the climate change, and we've got some that have got far too tall, too many dead branches that are falling into people's private gardens. So I would like to see, a good maintenance strategy come out of the paper. And going back to Councillor Trent, I don't think we can tell people what they plant in their gardens. I don't think that's within our remit. So I still think people should have personal choice on that.
Thank you. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. Yes, no, I think the picture is becoming clear that we need an overview on this, and that these two particular papers need to be separate. We can't put trees and roads together because it sounds like a great body of work. I do appreciate the work that Councillor Anderson's done in reaching out to this company in Scotland and a variety of other companies. But I think we need to look further afield, particularly to countries that routinely use plastics in the replacement of their road services and also the automation of the machinery that they use. But as with anything, we're back to the fact that we have to be aware that we've declared a climate and ecological emergency, and there is unforeseen consequences. For instance, the particulates from the wear on roads, if that's plastic, does that not add to the microplastics? So I think we need to do a great body of work to actually say, well, we've got this great new innovation, and slap it in there and find that another country, such as perhaps Belgium, have used this and found it and that got studies, etc. So I would recommend or strongly suggest that the two papers are separate, and for both papers that whoever it is that's assigned for our climate change champion actually is involved in that, because this is a far wider picture than just slapping a bit of tarmac down after somebody digs up a utility.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Councillor Anderson, did you want to come back on that?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I just realised that I actually congratulated Councillor Trent, not Councillor O'Neill, on his appointment as Vice Chairman, so I do apologise for that. But I am intending to have two separate workshops, not one workshop, so my apologise to councillors if I gave the impression that it was going to be one. And certainly if Councillor Farquhar has any suggestions on ideas, I'm more than willing to take them on board. And if you'd like to drop them to me, and anyone else, quite frankly, I don't think I have a monopoly on ideas. I'm more than happy to take them on board and see what we could do to look into them.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, they're both interesting areas, and I think both are worthy, as has been indicated, separate overview. With regards to trees, the only thing I would add to what's been said is that trees add to the efficiency or the inefficiency of street cleansing, and I think that needs to be considered as part of that overview. And the only other thing that may be worthy of some consideration, I'm aware of people that have had houses built or extended houses where the trees in situ are causing other problems. And Jackie Edwards mentioned about dropping branches. I'm aware of damage that's been done to vehicles parked on people's drive, dropping pine cones. And I do wonder whether a more pragmatic approach should be considered. So where there is evidence of risk, if a tree is taken down, it can be replaced, but not by one tree, but perhaps two or three of the appropriate replacements. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's quite clear. We're already getting into the detail of a much broader discussion in a couple of areas. Certainly, some of the issues raised ring a bell with me, and in particular, the state of our pavements, which were decimated in and around Bournemouth about 10 or 15 years ago, from which they've never recovered. Also, the quality and standard of road service repairs, although, of course, they do have to have a licence for them, and in theory, they are then put back to the state an agreed standard, and they should be right. And in terms of trees, yes, certainly an overall tree policy does sound very worthwhile. Of course, some elements of tree policy and strategy is dealt with under planning legislation and through the TPOs that applied on trees. But of course, a huge number of trees are actually owned by the council on the streets, and they don't come under the TPO regime, as I understand it, because they're maintained under the council's auspices. And so one would hope that they are maintained to a known standard. But from my experience, we are seeing some problems with very, very streets. So there are a lot of detailed issues already been raised today, and I think it sounds to me as if there's a violent agreement that we do need to look at both of these areas. The question is how we take it forward. But what I'd like to do is put that on the list of things that the board has got to consider. And when we come on to developing our future plans, if we could sort of note those two will form part of that, and when we can discuss how best to address the issues. But I'd like to thank Councillor Trent for bringing those to the committee. It does sound as if we're all violently in favour of that. Is there any dissent from taking those through into the future plans? No, it doesn't sound like it. So we have an agreement on that, and this is what we'll do. So we'll discuss that when we come on to the future plans for the board. So I think we can now move on to agenda item 9, scrutiny of finance-related cabinet reports. A very comprehensive report. Thank officers for producing it, and I'm sure it's probably going to promote a rather interesting debate. But I think we'll start off by introducing Councillor Mellor, Leader of the Council, Portfolio Holder for the Finance and Transformation, to introduce his paper 2020-21 Budget Monitoring and Medium-Term Financial Plan Update. So, Councillor Mellor, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and please can I also congratulate you on your appointment. I'm sure your personal integrity and independence will make you a great success.
Thank you.
As you said, Chair, there's a huge amount of detail in the papers in front of us here. I'll introduce at a high level, and we'll look forward to the questions. Before we kick off, just thank you to Adam and his wider team for an ongoing. It's an enormous amount of work in this area. None of us have known anything like the year 2020. So massive thank you to Adam and all his team. I'll bring out some key points if I may, Chair. There's you'll have seen there's a significant detail in the report regarding in-year service pressures by directorate. Worth stating that our overall in-year COVID impact has risen from, I think it's about 50 million to 57 million. Government continued to provide, significant funds to local government in tranches. We received, I believe it was 3.8 million last week in tranche 4, and await clarification of our application against lost income, which is just over 12 million, 12.1 million. We're still projecting a balanced in-year budget. As you'll see, there'll be a significant use of reserves in that. I believe we're using 28 million of reserves in year as part of balancing the COVID budget issues, leaving us with reserves of 41 million. I think it's also worth noting today, look, there has been a change of administration, and there will be some areas of new priority investment, from my administration, including a significant amount of work that is already underway on our Pride agenda, all around delivering cleaner and safer streets to bring back pride to the conurbation. So there's a cost to that. These plans are being worked up alongside other plans, and they will form part of a future update. Worth spending a little bit of time on the MTFP, if I may. Highlight to members that we now move to cover the 3-year period up to 23-24. We inherited a 49.1 million total funding gap as of the 1st of October in terms of what we were projecting for 21-22, because of, again, massive significant COVID related pressures. There's been a really large amount of work undertaken on that already, and we're now projecting, as you'll see, a 13.4 million funding gap. So we're on the way to bridging that gap, largely due to things we were already all as a council committed to, i.e. hardwiring in the transformation projected savings for next year. So that's looking to be for 15 million, and you'll see there's a recommendation to ask Director of Transformation and myself to bring a paper back that looks at that in more detail, which we will do, and significant plans underway in terms of that, and we're a high degree of confidence we can deliver it. There's also been a change of approach in terms of borrowing policy and capital policy, so how we're trying to use that, and that's effectively got us down from 49 to 13.4 alongside transformation. It's obvious to say, Chair, but it's still a very much a moving target, as forecasting around COVID is changing daily, but we can and we will deal with it. There's confidence in the financial officer, there's confidence from the financial officer, and I'm confident we can deal with the problems put in front of us, whilst bringing forward resources, against member priorities, which is fundamental. And if I may, I'll just briefly touch on your conversation from Councillor Trent's point earlier on. Absolutely, you know, we need to get members further ahead of papers, so it's members shaping priorities. You know, we will be bringing forward priorities. We were going to have to fund them, but because we're getting ahead of the budget, we will be able to do that. And I look forward to working with all members across the governance piece, but also in terms of how we're bringing priorities for funding forward. I think that's probably a pretty reasonable overview of where we are. I'd rather pause and we'll see if Adam would like to come in, but very much to answer questions. There's a lot of detail in here, so it'd be interesting to see where we want to take the discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Councillor Miller. You mentioned at the start of your talk 3.8 million as tranche 4. My question bases around a question which I've had from a resident for free school meals and the council supporting free school meals. They shared with me a Twitter feed which you sent out on October 24th, which announced that the fact that BCP Council will have a full programme of food parcels for any child in need over the half term, and thanking Marcus Rashford and our wonderful team of officers, etc. You attached to that a screenshot, I'm not sure of what, which actually refers to the government made clear that local council are the ones best placed to make sure that families who find themselves struggling with food poverty during these tough times get help. We've received additional money of around 3 million this week, a loan from government to help with our response. My question is this: is that 3 million ring fenced for free school meals, or is something else being used? My first question really is the 3 million that you refer to in your tweet, that 3.8 million that you referred to today, and if so, what of that money is actually ring fenced to provide free school meals, and what budget would that be? And in addition to that, then the third part of the question would be what's actually suffered? What else did you actually have earmarked, or what else did the administration actually have earmarked for that 3.8 million?
Chair, should I come in to each point now, or do you want to take a few points? I'm very happy to answer Councillor Farquhar, if that's how you'd prefer me to do it.
Well, there are 3 parts to that question,
Yep.
and I think probably it's not a bad idea to get this issue out of the way now.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks for the question, Councillor Farquhar. Yes, the 3 million I was referencing there is the 3.8 million I've just discussed. That was our tranche 4 allocation. So what the government's been doing consistently is, as and when further pressure rises, and they're delivering more funds to local government, which has been really well received. It was, they've been also very clear that the best people to make decisions about localities and the particular COVID pressures individual councils are facing are the local, councils and the local politicians in those areas. So it was a pretty obvious thing for me to do to want to support the free school meals initiative once we'd been absolutely clear we'd got enough money to do it. So very happy to do that. What is I think your third question was what's been taking out to fund that. Well, nothing as yet. We haven't, there's a massive moving beast in terms of the COVID response and the COVID budget related to it. So it changes on a daily basis. Some things go up, some things go down, and we're very much pleased and and delighted with the amazing effort for our officers to get that scheme rolled out over a weekend, and we just supported a lot of families last week.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miller. Councillor O'Neill, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The question, Councillor Miller, about the review, 50 million down to 13.4 million, a 73% swing is an enormous swing. In terms of those numbers, and it is a moving feast, how secure do we think we are? And I suppose the second part of the question is, in terms of the benefits yet to be realised, does that include any sale of assets, or those benefits to be accrued later on? Thank you.
Councillor Mellor, you're on mute.
brilliant. Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Tony. So yes, effectively what we're doing is, I've been quite public before about saying I was anti a fire sale of assets. So we're not. What we're trying to do now is to take a more considered view of how we can make best value of our assets. So this doesn't include selling any of our assets. What it does, one of the ways we can do that is by looking at more creative ways of using our assets, and how we're going to fund certain capital projects through borrowing. The large, in terms of what isn't there, on that reduction, the main thing that's outstanding that needs to happen is that £15 million around transformation savings. There's a lot of detailed work underneath that's coming forward, but that's it. If we don't make if we have extra service pressures from our directorates, then that will come up, and there's still a £4 million effectively pressures that our directorates are asking for investment that we're on an interim basis taking out to test it, to make sure they're the right places to be spending money. But very clear that we won't be selling assets to fund black holes in coronavirus budgets.
Thank you. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. I just, if I may, I'd just like a follow-up question for my original question for the free school meals allocation at the 3.8 million tranche 4 from government. Councillor Miller, you said that that it was right to allocate that. I asked you whether or not that money would be ring-fenced and how much would be budgeted to provide the free school meals. Perhaps my follow-up question is where and how will that appear in the medium-term financial plan, and how would it be how will we see other items that you make the decision to spend as and when you need to spend based upon what's happening? Because I'm not very au fait with looking at balance sheets and bits and pieces, but it would certainly help me out if you could point me in the direction of money that's coming in from the government and where it appears in the MTFP and how it is actually spent and accounted for. And the last thing then is that you refer to it as tranche 4. Do we expect further tranches, and if so, how many and how much?
Yeah, thank you very much again, George. So is it ring fence money? No, it's not. It's not. This particular way of spending it in terms of free school meals isn't any different to any other ways we've had funding pressures through, because of COVID. So, for instance, all of our PPE costs, etc. Bringing homeless in, an absolute array of things we've done over the last since March. So it's no different. Where you'll find out the detail on that, and by all means, email me, and I will always be very keen to help you with it. But it is in this exact report. So as you'll see, there's a lot of detail on individual directorates and their spending pressures there, where we're either up or down. And so if it's a material item, it would be found there. If it's under £100,000, then it's not something. It's something that can be done by officers. But any variances, material ones, are grouped and will be found in this report. So it should be quite easy to look at going forward. I'm very happy to discuss any point about with you at any point, George.
Thank you. So my last question then, which I haven't got an answer for, is how much money is actually being allocated, and will it be over 100,000 that you refer to? Because otherwise it doesn't appear as an individual item on the MTFP. Am I right in my understanding?
Yeah, no, you're not entirely right in terms of it can be appear on the MTFP or in the paper around the MTFP, regardless of whether it's 100,000 or not. It's just 100,000, is one of the thresholds, and you'll see one of the appendices in this report is for items under 100,000. So in terms of, we weren't sure at the time exactly how much take up there would be for free school meals. I think we've got about 6,000 children with free school meals. And there's a £15 box we were looking to do, so there's a maximum of £90,000. We didn't have a full take up, entirely full take up, but we had a very good take up. So it'd be less than 90,000, and we can come to you with the exact number shortly.
Thank you, Councillor Mel. Adam Richards, you put your hand up earlier on. Would you like to come in now? Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, just to maybe point Councillor Farquhar in the direction of page 332 of the pack. On that page is figure 1 that sets out, as Councillor Manor has done, the in-year financial position of BCP Council. One of the lines in there is a line that says COVID-19 grant. That is the unring-fenced government funding that we have received, and the £25.2 million related to tranches 1, 2 and 3, and as Councillor Mellor has said, tranche 4, which was received after the date for the publication of this report, will feed into the December update that will be taken forward to Cabinet.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Councillor Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a couple of queries. The first one relating.
Councillor Slade, we've lost your audio. I don't know what's happened there.
Sorry.
That's it. That's better.
Yes. First of all, relating to the free school meals, bearing in mind that on each occasion that we've had a slice of grant from government, it's been inadequate for what we needed to spend it on. Clearly, if you're allocating £90,000 for last week, and I would assume £180,000 for the Christmas holidays, then that is going to be a fair slice. That's nearly 10% of the tranche 4 money that was allocated. That is going to have quite a significant impact on what else you can fill. As you said, we're still left with a significant COVID hole. There will clearly be things we can't do. So I'm slightly concerned at the flippancy around that figure, because there hasn't been enough on each and every occasion to cover the shortfall. Clearly, last week, the decision to fund free school meals came on Saturday afternoon, so too late to proactively contact all of those families. But I'd like some clarification about the work that's going to be done to proactively contact every one of those 6,000 children in advance of Christmas, in case there is a need to do that. On a kind of, do you want me to cover a couple other things now, Steve, or do you want me to come back?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, but I think we are sort of branching out into areas that are not specific to the MTPF.
Well, they are. If there's going to be additional spend outside of these figures, then obviously they do have an impact.
Yeah, I understand that, but you're talking about the process of notifying people and things like that, which is about the procedure.
It is, but it's an assurance that actually we are going to make sure that money is dedicated, and not just hope that people are, you know, going to let us know that they'd like the money, which doesn't feel right. I'll move on, shall I? In terms of some specifics in the paper, because there's a lot in there, as there should be, but not a lot's been covered around the detail. The first thing is around what are we actively doing to find lower cost placements in children's social care, because these numbers are increasing, they're accelerating, you know, month on month, and it does appear that the placements are becoming more expensive. So I want to know what's proactively being done to source placements that aren't going to put the public purse at quite so much pressure. Secondly, a question about why commercial waste is still closed when I understood that was reopening in August. I don't see any reason why that's still closed, and therefore that's a further pressure. And the other thing really is the 50 million transformation savings were identified under the previous administration. I went through that in some detail with the strategic director back in September. So it's good to see that that's remaining. But with such a huge hole still to fill, do you think it's appropriate for you to start adding in more priorities that you've suggested you're going to add in due course within this year? Should they not be put in for next year's budget? Because at this point in the financial year, we should actually be looking at planning next year's budget and not making in-year changes to this year's budget. Thank you.
Are you all right with that, Councillor Miller? I think I've got 3 distinctly different questions there. What are we actually doing to lower the placements? What's proactively being done for those very high cost placements that we have? Commercial waste, is it closed? Why is it closed? And the transformation, £50 million transformation savings.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. Look forward to doing that. The first tranche that sat above those questions were around free school meals. Firstly of all, it will be less than 90k because the take up was less. You know, work's already started in terms of the Christmas programme. We're absolutely dedicated to the fact that it won't be done over a weekend. It'd be done in consultation with both businesses who want to support and the schools and our experience from the council. I mean, Councillor Slade says effectively that were you happy to actually put this money in because you're going to have to take some money out from elsewhere. Well, for me, feeding children is a priority, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't a priority for her as well. So that was money I was very happy to allocate. In terms of the children's service, I think children's services is a really interesting point. Actually, it's the biggest area in terms of what happens often in council budgets. In terms of pressure, you can lose your budget around children's services very quickly. We're in a situation where we just had a recent Ofsted visit, and children's services in general have we will have a serious job to do around long-term improvement in that directorate and supporting it. So Councillor Slade is absolutely right to talk about how we're going to get around lower cost of placements. A big part of that is going to be a massive improvement agenda that this council is on in terms of children's services. What I said when I sat in front of CMB on the first morning of this administration was our priorities are around transformation and long-term pride, regeneration and children's services, because it's not acceptable the standards of children's services as it is, and we need to support them to get much better. Yeah, so in terms of you also sorry, point earlier I wanted to make was around your point around government funding. You said it's always inadequate. Well, it's just not true, is it, Councillor Slade? The first two tranches was 22 million, so we've got two tranches of 11 million. I haven't got the exact number in front of me, but our actual cost of COVID pressures at that point was around 13 or 14 million. So the government funded initially. What the government haven't funded was effectively fees and charges, and they've separately now come forward, and we've been able to put a claim in of over £12 million on fees and charges. So I have a different view to you, and I think the government's done a fantastic job in terms of funding local authorities. You say that it's huge, the deficit, and should we be having critical priorities on that? Well, it's smaller than the 49.1 million that it was on the last day of your administration. So it's not anywhere near as huge as it was. And the point about political priorities, really, yes, I do think it's right to put them in, because I'm not abandoning my political priorities. I'm not abandoning the people that need us in this. We said up in our budget reset paper that not enough was being done. What the previous administration did was cancel every single priority of theirs around COVID, and we said clearly, and we're saying it again, that's not good enough, and we're not going to make that mistake. So yeah, I think I've answered your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. You wanted to come in, please.
I just wanted to come in on the point regards to children's services, just to highlight recommendation E of the substantive report that requests the Director of Children's Services, the Corporate Director for Children's Services, that is, to provide a report as part of the December budget monitoring report that will set out the further details of the pressures being faced in children's services, and at the same time setting out the mitigations that potentially can be put in place or are being put in place to bring that overall cost down.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Councillor Vicky Slade.
Yeah, I just want to come back on that, because I'm very grateful for trying to give me a lesson in how it all works. But although you're right in that much of the additional spending has been covered, the rules are that a maximum of 70% of our income can be covered. So whichever way you cut this, bearing in mind your paper makes a really good point early on that the preceding councils had moved quite significantly to show that a high proportion of the way the councils are funded is through income, i.e. car parking income, fees and charges, rental income, etc. Bearing in mind that was a deliberate move, and you quote something like it puts BCP in a very vulnerable position. You're therefore almost a third of your income is going to go uncollected, even if we get all of the money that we've bid for. So, I don't think it's really fair to say that, they've been incredibly generous. Almost every council in the country have said that the government have let them down and are still calling that the government do what they said at the beginning, which was to cover all the costs. So I'm interested that you're the only council leader I've ever heard of that thinks the government's doing a great job on this. And we shall have to see how it goes. The suggestion there was 49 million on the last day of our administration is because that quarter hadn't been tied up. I've looked through, and actually the vast majority of the things were already in all of the budget updates that we were doing. So to suggest that you've gone from 49 million to 13 million in the space of 3 weeks is disingenuous at best, misleading at worst.
Thank you, Chair. May I come back briefly? I'll be brief. Yeah.
Yes, very briefly then, please, Councillor Miller.
What Robert Jenrick actually said is he'd cover the cost of this, and they have done. Effectively, as I said in the tranche 1 and 2, our costs were 13 or 14 million, and which is expenditure, and our income from the government in tranches 1 and 2 was 22 million. And it's not disingenuous to say that there's a significant change in the financial strategy. There's a lot in there, particularly around borrowing, use of assets, use of capital assets. So yes, one massive change is we're not going to be selling off civic centres to pay for transformation. So yeah, but anyway, Chair, I believe we've had a nice discussion about that.
Councillor Cox. And incidentally, I'm sorry there's been a problem with your holding your hand up. It's only just a second come on my screen, so apologies for whatever's going on.
It's all right, Mr. Chair. It has been raised for some time. I suppose I had a few questions. One was, I think Councillor Mello mentioned 27 million use of reserves. My immediate thought was the general reserves, which if you look at the general reserves, actually the use is very small indeed. It's about 1.9 million. But I suspect he's talking about earmarked reserves. One question I did have was in terms of the planning assumptions that have been used. I just wanted to know if there's any changes in terms of the planning assumptions, and in terms of the borrowing, I applaud his use of additional borrowing. I think this is just the right time to use additional borrowing, which I've said before in other meetings, providing it is used to invest, not to spend money. I think that is vitally important. However, I'll leave it. I think we should leave it to the general public to decide whether this government has been a success or not. I think you're the first person I've ever come across who think that they're making a good job of it at the moment. And in terms of your use of figures, I think once again you're playing fast and loose with some of those numbers, and for political gain. And actually, what you've done is to inherit a very good position from the previous administration. And at the moment, I've been through the paper, and incidentally, I just want to congratulate Adam Richards for the paper, which is extremely good. But I don't really see that much change in it from the previous one, and I really, rather than a reset and reset and what did you call it? Reset and refresh. It's more like a cut and paste from the previous administration. So I just like an idea of any assumption changes you've made, and also I would the other thing I'd like to reiterate is spending money in this year would be extremely foolhardy, no matter what your politics are. I think as I mentioned at the last budget meeting, we're playing pretty close to the line when it comes to our reserves, and I don't really think we should be spending it without actually having the money in the bank. Thank you.
Should we come back to that, Councillor Miller?
Yeah, great. Look forward to it. Chair, first of all, yes, you're right, Michael. It is earmarked reserves. Effectively, it's the majority of that. Our unearmarked reserves are pretty much as low as you're allowed to be, effectively. So we'd have any more challenge, going much lower than that. Your questions around assumptions, yes, and some assumptions have changed in terms of years 2 and years 3. Adam might know in more, correct me if I'm wrong, but effectively we've changed the I believe we're going down 50% in both preceding years, with the assumption that effectively, this shouldn't last forever. I think that's still relatively prudent. As and when we hear more about this, we hear about vaccines, early part of next year. If that happens to not be the case, then we will need to relook at that, and we might need to unwind some of those assumptions. They may be too prudent, but we will see. Really agree with you, actually, obviously, in terms of the borrowing piece, and I appreciate your comment on that. Just to be clear, categorically, I agree around borrowing to invest. That's what we need to do. We have an obligation, and we call it the Generations Fund in our budget reset paper, where we were to say effectively you need to invest because you need to land the next generation with a greater set of assets than your generation. Comes back to my point around the previous administration's fire sale of assets policy, and we'll not be doing that. Because I want to leave the next generation with more assets than we were going to before. Yes, thank you as well. In terms of your points around priorities, you said we've inherited a great position, but then you've said that we can't afford to spend on priorities. Maybe that's a political difference, then, isn't it? Really, I'm going to work hard enough at getting underneath these numbers so that we can still invest in what our communities need. And very much look forward to bringing that forward in the next weeks and months. So. And it became a lot easier, bluntly, to balance the budget when you cancelled all your priorities. But Adam, is there anything in particular around assumptions that would be worth spending a bit more time in detail on, or have I got the main ones in there?
Drew, in answer to the question, I think you've clearly picked up the main change in our assumptions, which was a careful reflection on the potential recovery from the position we find ourselves in this year, particularly around the impact on sales fees and charges and the impact on council tax and business rates yields. So that was the main change. Another change is that we reflected long and hard around the pay award, and we decided not to put anything within service budget for the pay award, but to recognise it as a potential contingent item and reflect that as part of the overall contingency provision that we will set out in the budget that comes forward in February next year.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Councillor Chris Rigby.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's just a couple of points that I'd like to refer to in the document. The first one is point 48, which is the car parking income at Upton Country Park, which has improved with the new play park being open, which is really good to see that being used, and that not being an insubstantial amount as well, which is reducing the pressure by. A bit further on in the document, you've also got point 64, where you said a clear message from the new administration is that there's a number of priority areas for investment in year, and they're being worked up at pace. What I just want to ask you to discuss, if I can, is as things have been moving forward and changing throughout COVID, we've really seen the value of our outdoor spaces and our green spaces being used. And I think that car parking income can really show the benefit and how much people want to get out and into the countryside as much as possible. With the new plans that you're working up, are you looking at significant investment into green spaces and areas which residents can get out to and use and make them more accessible? And really, where, if that's so, and you're working up these new, when can we be expecting to see this report as well come before overview and scrutiny? Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Really happy about that, and really good point actually around Upton, because it sort of goes into what Mike and I were saying on the previous point around investment. So okay, that might be a smaller way of investing rather than investing in large buildings or companies, etc. But we put some money into that. Admittedly we got it through, granted primarily, and then it's got more use. So let's be bolder. We can do more of that stuff. So if people have got projects like that they're keen to bring forward in their own local areas. I mean, I know Upton use it often with my children. So, but if there are other ones that effectively, that has worked really well. So let's, there's no monopoly on good ideas. If people have got things they want to see brought forward, very keen to have a look at it. You talk about priorities and green space. Absolutely. I agree with you on that again. I think it's really important now. There's a bit here around what's the sort of the short-term priorities and what's the more medium and longer-term stuff. you'll have seen in our budget reset paper, we talked about a community municipal bond as a way of effectively, raising, £1-2 million to actually then invest in green projects. So we will we have an announcement on that in the first 100 days. And we've got a project coming forward around how we're going to be planting more trees, but again, that's a more medium to long term piece. So in terms of short term, if you've got some ideas and think it'd be really worthwhile and effectively unlock some spaces or some engagement with the public at this time when we need to, that's exactly what the type of idea we were talking about in budget reset. We've got a COVID crisis that is lots of things. It's mental health, it's schools, it's children. How can we address that? So please feel free to come forward with any ideas on that. In terms of when you're going to see a paper on it, well, effectively, we're looking to start bringing things forward to the December cabinet, and overview and scrutiny will have the opportunity there. I keep coming back to the governance point because I'm absolutely adamant, and this is something we're going to do, and we're going to get right as an authority of 74 councillors. Members have to get ahead of the forward plan. We've always been, every council I've been involved in, and this is the third one I've been involved in, members generally are far behind the forward plans. So let's work out how we can genuinely do the overview as this committee can, but as also how we as a membership body can, and I hope to start that discussion tomorrow. So yeah, I think I've answered your question.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Councillor Mike Cox, and I note your hand is up, Councillor Howell. I'll come to you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things I wanted to follow up on. One was your insistence that there was a fire sale. I wasn't aware there was any fire sale going on, but there may well have been a sale of some strategic assets which would have been logical to sell. One of them, which has been on the agenda for quite some time, I think from a previous authority, was the sale of Christchurch Civic Centre. Do I assume from what you said, therefore, that Christchurch Civic Centre will not be sold, because that is a prime piece of land in the middle of Christchurch, which frankly would be, if it's not being used, would as a council officers would be prime profitable land to be sold for the benefit of the councillors, the council taxpayers. The other thing is a bit of a detail which I think Adam might be able to tell me about, and that is to do with the assumptions on the adult social care. We've got in there, certainly in 21, 22 and onwards, 5% increase in the national minimum wage, which on the basis that the rest of our assumptions seem to be saying 0% is quite some difference. And also with that, I think within that, you've got inflation of CPI of 2%. I just wondered if you could comment on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. So in terms of the fire sale, one thing we have done is the sale of a Poole Civic Centre, the receipts from the capital receipts from the Poole Civic Centre were going to be funding the transformation budget, or part of the transformation budget, and we've changed that. So our ability to borrow for that capital project, which will save us millions and millions of pounds, so it's a good investment, has enabled us to take this Poole Civic Centre cash receipt out of that project. I think the Poole Civic Centre is very similar to the Christchurch Civic Centre in terms of what we'll be looking to do with both of them is to make them, as you said before, Mike, it's about investing. So, and we've had a long-term priority around regeneration. So those sites need to come forward in some way. The Poole site, we're committed to keeping the main section of it in terms of the listed section for the civic space and other opportunities we can use it for. Development around there is possible. Christchurch site in particular, you asked for. Well, absolutely, that's got to come forward. And I think there's a willingness for people to take that forward. It's a massive regeneration opportunity there. There's different ways of doing it. You can sell it, just put a for sale sign outside of it, and that's unlikely to yield the best income. We could do it in a partnership with somebody, or we could do it ourselves. So there's opportunities there. But what we have done is been able to step back from an immediate requirement to sell assets, which in my view wouldn't have got us best value for them. In terms of the adult piece, you know, I think we're all aware that the adult service line is acutely exposed to changes in minimum wage. You know, a significant member of it's very resource heavy in terms of people, and a lot of them are at that lower pay threshold. So that is I think one of the reasons why, you know, 5% assumption there is a safe and prudent thing to do. Adam, do you want to come in on the assumptions piece?
Yes, thank you, Drew. So just to highlight, Appendix D3 to the paper sets out some background details as the assumptions that we've made in the medium-term financial plan. In regards to section H, it talks about inflationary costs. So within inflationary costs, what it does is it identifies what the consumer price index is as at August, 0.2%. But what we make absolutely clear is we only include inflation within budgets where the service directorates can demonstrate that it is needed either for market or contract conditions. And that's the only circumstances that will actually then feed, if you like, inflationary cost pressures into our budget as being drawn up as part of this process. And then just turning to what Drew said, when it comes to pay, you know, clearly we've had a previous announcement from the government that made a commitment towards achieving the national living wage of a certain amount by a certain date. And what we've done is worked out in order to achieve that equates to about 5% increases over the next 3 years as part of that process. And we've allowed for that as part of this medium-term financial plan. But when it comes to actually, if you like, pay for the officer corps, we reflected on a statement that's already been made by the Chancellor around the expectation that in future we can expect public sector pay constraint. So, you know, that's where we've assumed actually nothing within specific services, but allowed something just in case as part of that in contingency. And what we're looking for is from the 1 year spending round that we believe will be announced at the end of this month, we will hopefully get some clarity about those aspects so that we can then update our financial planning assumptions for either December or ultimately the budget being put forward in February.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Councillor Howell, please.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to correct some of the statements made by Councillor Mellor. You know, it's very surprising to hear him come forward and say that, you know, that we planned a fire sale when, in fact, we didn't bring forward a paper in any details to what would happen to the civic centres, Poole and Christchurch, and Councillor Mellor will be appearing in later on today in front of us, presenting a paper which says that Poole and Christchurch civic centres will be sold as soon as possible. So what you're doing is actually moving to sale more quickly than we were planning to do. So how can you not be accused of being a fire sale? You know, just look at the previous administration's record. We purchased the power station sites on behalf of the council, adding probably, well, an enormous piece of land, one of the greatest investments in terms of assets for the council that this council, you know, particularly the legacy council, any of them would have made for many years. You know, contrast that to the fact that we've only, you know, you've been in place 1 month, and I understand that the proposal that the previous administration put forward to let to purchase a space in Old Town Poole to create creative live workspace and to deliver homes and much needed workspace and retail space, that has been dropped, rejected by the LEP when it was on track when we left it. So the record already of your administration is that you're getting rid of assets more quickly when we were adding to the assets. Now,
can I just come in a minute, please?
Yeah.
Can you please talk to the paper we're discussing?
Well, yeah, I will now, but I just felt that was a necessary correction because Councillor Mellor was clearly not stating the correct facts.
Okay.
I would like to ask Adam Richards actually in relation to the use of borrowing rather than receipts from capital receipts in relation to transformation. So no, I'm not an accountant, but it would appear to me that if you use borrowing, then that reduces your potential to use borrowing for other purposes, because we have borrowing cap limits, whatever they may be set at, and therefore, what we would have planned if we'd have been administration, we would have been using borrowing to progress regeneration. So isn't what is happening here is that just figures are being moved around and swapped around, but actually there's no new money being created here. So the question is, does this use of borrowing reduce our borrowing cap, essentially the one that the council sets as its limit?
Mr. Richards.
Just to confirm, with regards to the approach being taken, we're proposing to borrow actually in regards to where an asset is purchased or created. So regards to transformation, there are elements of that program that we will be purchasing assets, and potentially elements of that program that we will be creating assets. And in that instance, we can borrow for those elements of the program, but not necessarily all of the program as previously put forward. With regards to the council's borrowing caps, then actually, as part of the annual Treasury Management Strategy that goes to the Audit and Governance Committee, in January every year, they set out pre-agreed, if you like, caps on the council's levels of borrowing, as advised by officers based on the council's ambition and what the council's aiming to achieve every year. So it is within the gift of the council every year to revise those caps. So clearly those caps that come forward for next year, we will be looking to reflect on the administration's budget proposals and ambitions as part of the caps that are put forward for consideration and seeking members' approval as part of that process.
But those caps are.
Thank you, Mr. Richards.
Can I just add one further question to that, supplementary, please?
Yes, if you just let Councillor Mellor come in first, and then you can come in after that.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, so I disagree actually, Mark, with your assessment there, because what is a fact is the pool receipt, the receipt from the Pool Civic Centre was in the budget to fund transformation, and it's not now. The reason I talked about it, and I've been consistent with this, in this same committee, but just sat on a different side of it. The reason I've called it a fire sale is because of the time window you need to be able to use capital receipts for revenue purposes. Means we were looking at selling quite a lot of our assets within a 2-year window, and I don't believe we had the resourcing to look at working out how we could get best genuine, market best value for them. So I think we have made a real, significant impact now. We will. You talk about the paper later. That's for later. But in terms of the finances, which is relevant to this, we will sell or develop. It's about regeneration. It's about delivering longer term assets for us rather than just selling them for cash. I do commend. I've spoken to you about this privately. The power station work. It's an immense achievement and one that would be really, really positive for all of us. So fantastic job to you personally on that. Generations of around here will benefit because we pulled that forward. In terms of the piece around the LEP project in Poole, you said it quite rightly. It's rejected by the LEP. Why have they rejected it? Because it doesn't add up. It's significantly underwater in terms of money. And as much as I do respect you, and I believe that I do. In terms of turning down LEP money or grant money, you walked away from £6 million of money in terms of a town centre. So it's a bit of balance here. Look, I believe there is a significantly different, overview to how we're looking at finance. There's a lot of great things that happened under your administration. A strength of it, in my opinion, wasn't finance. I don't think you had, strength in terms of financial leadership. So we're doing things differently.
Thank you, Councillor Mellor. Councillor Howe wanted to come back.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to come back on that borrowing point to Adam. I mean, although the council can set borrowing limits, you presumably, as chief financial officer, would under your duties not allow those borrowing limits to be set at a level that you thought was potentially dangerous to the council's financial position. So, you know, is it true that the borrowing limits are, you know, are set by councillors but subject to approval by yourself?
If I can maybe come in on that, then yes, clearly, as the Chief Financial Officer, I will be advising Council with regards to its level of borrowing and how sustainable that level of borrowing is. And you can be reassured, as part of that budget paper, I will certainly be setting out some comparisons with other unitary authorities of similar sizes that give members that feel as to whether or not this is an appropriate level of borrowing for a council of this size.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Richards. Councillor Vicky Slade.
I think George was before me.
He was, but I don't mind Councillor Farquhar, but you've had a couple of questions already, and Councillor Slade hasn't spoken on this yet. So, if that's right. Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, you have.
I have.
I might be unfair. Sorry.
You are. I don't mind going first if you like. I just don't want to steal George's thunder.
No, all right then. Go on, Councillor Farquhar. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Slade. Really much obliged. Because I'm new to this, I've got the advantage of, or disadvantage, depending on how you look at it, not necessarily understanding a lot of terminology. You know, revenue, assets, this, that, and all the rest of it discussed. One of the things which I'm always conscious of, because I came into this council rather quickly, particularly because of COVID, is that all of these things are now broadcast to the outside world. And sometimes there'll be a lot of difficulty for members of the public watching. These are the residents who we're all answerable to. So if I'm confused while I'm in part of the debate, then I'd like to, you know, clear that confusion, not just for myself, but for the residents that are actually watching. And what I'd like to for Councillor Mellor to confirm is that in answer to one question, you categorically said you will not be selling off civic centres. You also said, and I was glad to hear it, that you'll be borrowing to invest for the next generation. So we'll not be selling off civic centres. In answer to another question, though, you said we could put a for sale board outside the civic centre. So my first question is this, just for clarity, is the new administration selling off civic centres or not selling off civic centres? Because these two comments which you made, Councillor Mellor, are contradictory. The next question relates to.
Shall I answer the first one first?
No, if you please, Councillor Mellor. The next one, and again, it's you referred to the first 100 days. And I'm not sure, because I haven't yet seen sight of a 100-day plan, and I don't think our residents have seen sight of a 100-day plan. So in our capacity here as overview, is there a published 100-day plan, or are you literally making it up on the hoof and dropping in things for scrutiny as part of your presentations on papers? Because I'm confused, because I don't know what we're supposed to be doing as a board to overview the administration, or particularly in this case, the executive, without sight of a 100-day plan and what your priorities actually are. So 2 questions there, if you please, and thank you very much for your indulgence, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. If I may respond. I believe what I said was I will not sell assets. I will not be selling civic centres to fund projects. So effectively, you know, the regeneration of those centres is what we're going to bring forward. So whether that means we ended up selling them, whether that means we ended up partnering with somebody to develop them, whether that means we develop them ourselves, is all options are on the table. Whereas what was on the table previously was the pool specifically was earmarked for being sold and the capital receipt to fund the transformation budget. So that is a clear difference. So will I sell parts of the Poole Civic Centre and develop it? Absolutely, as long as it's best value, up against whether we develop it ourselves or do it in a joint venture with somebody else. I think the Christchurch site is simpler because that whole site there is available for development. Thank you very much for referencing the 100 days. I think we've been really clear, talking about pride, governance, environment, the things we're going to be doing. You know, and I said in my speech to full council, this is a council that will put members at the heart of its administration and residents at the heart of the council. So, you know, governance, and you'll see with the lead members we've brought forward already in terms of engagement and equalities. So, yeah, you know, I believe it's a strong plan of work. Lots more is coming. You'll see a lot more of it as we develop it. There is a process for bringing papers forward. So what we've done is effectively most of the papers coming to this cabinet are the papers we've inherited. We've taken forward a lot of them. A lot of good work was going on, but there's a correct process to bringing stuff forward, and we will look forward to doing that and really welcome the scrutiny on it. And as I said before, we need to get members ahead of the forward plan, which has never happened in any authority I've been on before. So, and they've been Liberal Independent twice and Conservative. So we have an opportunity to do that, and I'm committed to it.
Okay, thank you. Jess, we'll be talking about the future of the ONS board later, and it's up to us to see how far ahead we can get. Councillor Vicky Slade, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to hear Drew talking about getting ahead of the cabinet papers, because I think for the last year I'd been asking the chair of Overview and Scrutiny to stop bringing things that were coming to cabinet next week and actually start helping to form policy that was 6 months to a year ahead, and it never happened. So I'm determined now I'm on this committee that will work with the chair to make sure that that does happen now, because that has been a failing of ONS for the last year, in my view. A couple of things. I have to repeat what Councillor Howell said. There was never any suggestion we were not keeping the historic part of Paul Civic Centre. I really wish that the administration would stop repeating it as if it, and you know, it's almost a bit like Boris Johnson. If you keep saying something, people start believing it. It isn't true. It was never true. We were never going to get rid of that. And the idea that it was, I think, has scared people. Secondly, it is worth noting that we'd already talked about vastly reducing the price of the accommodation strategy, which I know we're coming on to later. So therefore, a different strategy for funding that was already being looked at. So at £29 million, there's no way it could have been done any other way. But if it's only going to be £6 million, bit of a hint for a later, then of course you can look at things differently. So, you know, again, things that were already in the pipeline. I don't want the public to think that it's all brand new ideas. I am really worried about the statement that we have not put any money in next year for any pay increase. I'm hoping that perhaps Adam can clarify this. A pay freeze is very different from public sector pay constraint. And Boris Johnson has said in the last few weeks, there is no question of freezing public sector pay. I cannot see how the unions will go from fighting us for 2.75 down to an absolute freeze. For my pea brain, if we have 5,000 staff and we average a 30,000 salary, and I have no idea what the average salary is, that works out in my pea brain as £150 million a year salary bill. A 2% increase based on that is £3 million. Worst case scenario, you could be looking in 4 months' time, when the unions say absolutely no way, we're not accepting a pay freeze, at something between 3 million, assuming it's a 30,000 average salary, and maybe 5, 6, 7 million shortfall. Have I really heard you right that you have put nothing in for a pay increase? Surely it's better to put in 1.5% and then end up underspending than put zero in. And what the heck are the staff going to think when you've just announced from nowhere that we're not planning to give any pay increases next year? I find that absolutely horrifying. Bearing in mind we've all clapped for key workers for the last 6 months. We're now looking at absolutely shafting them by freezing the pay of our refuse workers. I'm mortified, actually, mortified.
Can I, Stephen,
Mr. Richards.
Can I come in? Yeah, perhaps I didn't phrase it very well, Vicky, in the sense that what we've done is put nothing within the services direct budgets for the pay award. What we've done is we put in what we would normally put in as part of the contingency. So it's included within the contingency and will be treated as a contingency item until such time we've got the clarity as to what the rate will be, and then we'll take it from contingency and transfer it to services.
And to be clear, if I may, may Chair come in? Yeah, thank you. To be clear, that was your paper effectively that was doing that. So effectively, we have made no change to that. So what you've just criticised at length is your own paper that I've inherited. And into your papers that I've inherited, Vicky, is also the fact that you said you had no point when you're planning on disposing of the Poole Civic Centre. Well, what I had to do in terms of changing the paper that I inherited from you on transformation was remove the word disposable time and time again. You've been consistent, and if it's loose language, it's been your administration have been loose around the language around the Poole Civic Centre.
Yeah, it's totally untrue, and you know that centre and Julie Noscott will clarify that the main part of that civic centre was always being retained. So I'm sorry for your playing.
Then I believe you should have been cleaner with your language and your looser language around it, because all you've ever talked about is disposal.
Slade and Councillor Mellor, can you please address through the chair, please? Thank you. Councillor Lawrence Fear. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, obviously this being your first meeting of chairing, but I'd just like to remind all members that they are invited at your request. So I'd just like to kind of bring the debate down, attach and just take the heat out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. Look, we've had a really good go at this now, and I think we're going to have to bring the discussion to a conclusion now. There are I've got 3 pages of specific questions to the paper, which I thought I would just give Mr. Richings a little examination on. I think I'm going to have to skip past them because time is pressing and we need to get on with the agenda. Before I do that, Councillor Slade, you've still got your hand up. Did you want to come back in? No, you're okay. Okay, we'll move on then. Thank you. Look, if you don't mind, then a couple of questions for you, please, Mr. Richards. On page 34, you talk about the reserves on paragraph 70, and we're talking about the dedicated schools grant deficit, which is not included in the reserves figure, and we're looking at potentially a deficit of 9.6 million by next year. How is that managed, and what risk is there to the reserves because of that?
Just to come in on that, Councillor Bartlett, in the sense that, from 2021 onwards, because what I'm about to say doesn't apply in regards to 1920, there has been an update in guidance from government with regards to the procedures we need to follow when it comes to dedicated schools grant. You remember that what we previously did is we set aside resources to act as a counterbalance within reserves for any deficit on the dedicated schools grant. We no longer have to do that going forward, and that's why previously the previous administration were able to release the resources to support the transformation that have now been subsequently redirected again. But that's enabled us to redirect and provide some of that initial upfront funding. Going forward, if the council were in a position where it wanted to, of its own accord, make a contribution towards the dedicated schools grant, then it would have to seek explicit approval of Secretary of State. And as we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, getting any approval of Secretary of State to make contributions either from the council or others towards the dedicated schools grant proposition is something that is very difficult to obtain through that process. So, it is something that we recognise that deficit of £9.3 million. We have to treat it slightly differently than we did previously, but what the council is alert to that deficit and is working with the Department of Education on a recovery plan to try and recover that deficit over a period of time, and including in that, take action to prevent the deficit increasing going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. On page page 39, paragraph 105, we're talking about a shortfall of 9.4 million in revenue elements for the organisational design. It's a really big number, and I just wonder what the implications for the transformation programme would be.
Clearly we've identified that we've taken through this meeting already. We've identified that we're taking a different approach to financing schemes that can be funded from borrowing and refinancing of the organisational design budget. What it means is that we will now have to budget for the pressure that we will have in any specific year on the organisational design budget within the actual budget for that year. So next year we will have to budget for, if you like, those costs that we expect to fall next year, and instead of them being funded up front, they will take an account of in the budget setting for next year. And any costs for the following year, we won't be provided them up front. We'll take them account of them in the budget setting process for that year. So you get this situation where expenditure is being matched, if you like, to the period from which you start to derive benefit, which is akin to what some of the steps we're taking on borrowing is designed to do and achieve as part of that process. So, but clearly it is a risk, as is the fact that, that organisational design budget is dependent on the flexible use of capital receipts and funding £12.26 million of that programme from those capital receipts in 21-22.
Okay, thank you. I know you wanted to come in, Councillor Mellor, but I think you might want to wait for my next question. You might want to address that at the same time, because it links to it. And that's on page 45, paragraph 130, when we're looking at the transformation savings. And I see that the transformation savings is showing at about 72 million over the 3-year period. I also note that you're going to be doing a cabinet paper in December to show where some of those savings will actually be coming from. But I just wondered, the degree of confidence that you have is an understatement, an overstatement? What's the potential degree of accuracy for that figure?
When it comes to the transformation program, the purpose of the recommendation report requesting the Director of Corporate Transformation to bring forward a paper in December is designed to try and get everybody onto the same page and the same level of confidence around those transformation savings, because traditionally when it comes to savings and efficiencies, they would all be itemized as part of a budget. So really the purpose of the December paper will be to establish the extent to which we can itemize them and the extent to which we are taking a risk, so that when it comes to that budget setting, we can reflect upon that risk and make sure that we've got adequate coverage as part of that overall budget framework.
Okay, thank you. It was interesting, there was quite a few questions about the assumptions made in terms of national minimum wage limits and inflation, and I picked up on that. I won't go into that.
Councillor, just to emphasise, we are budgeting for an assumption that there will be pay growth next year, but we're just including it in contingency rather than service budgets, and that's probably just an accounting treatment adjustment rather than anything else.
Okay, just one last one then, a quick one. On page 99, on paragraph 34, the first bullet point, you talk about communities taking more responsibility for their need. I just wondered if you could just explain what is meant by that.
Well, that might be actually a question for later on today when you reflect on the when you've actually got the Director of Transformation in front of you, because he can potentially give you some more background as to those transformation savings and where they'll be coming from as part of that process.
Yeah. All right then. Thank you, Mr. Richards. Councillor Mellor.
Chair. So there's a couple of things I just wanted to touch on, and I will be brief. Adam's touched on it effectively. Why are we making this change in policy in terms of how we're going to fund things, both in terms of the transformation budget, the capital budget in more general terms. Historically, what we've done is we've paid for stuff up front, so we've effectively saved up pots of cash in revenue, and then we've had pots of cash to pay for things. What I think is important to do is to actually align the benefit to the spend. So effectively, we're actually spending it over a period of using an asset over a period of time and spending it over a period of time. Now, in the middle of the biggest financial crisis, we will have ever, generationally been in. Now's not the time to pay for things, up front. It's about, and also if we look at the fact that the debt is incredibly cheap. So if you can lock in debt for 40 years at, less than 2% sometimes, then that's actually good and sound economics. So that's that's effectively my sort of rationale and thinking. So why I've gone on to Adam and said that this is effectively something I'd like you to look at. Just as a general point, I've also spoken to the external auditor in the last week, and he's clearly said to me that your borrowing is low. It doesn't give him any cause of concern at the moment. So there's an opportunity there. We haven't borrowed enough because we've been paying for things up front. There's an opportunity there to unlock some of that, which will in turn mean we can actually invest in some political priorities. Can I just briefly touch on the confidence around the transformation number? My confidence is high in it. I think we should be able to deliver it. It's going to be a challenging piece of work, but it's something that we absolutely can do, and I'm confident we can do. The main three areas we're going to be doing in that is, consolidation of common roles of work. There's a lot of duplication there. Consolidation of organisational layer structures. I forget entirely, but there's something like 15 layers going up to the chief exec, and that's a very not very perfect organisational chart. And the third one, which some of the spending is going to come forward in terms of next year, is going to be around third-party spend, and it's just more robust procurement and contract management, that type of thing. So the work's done on it. We're nearly ready to go with papers on it. I've been really pleased with the work that's done on it, and I'm highly confident we can deliver it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cox, I've been told, I can't see your hand up, but I understand you have a recommendation you wish to table.
I do, Mr. Chairman. I was told, I think that I put these into the chat box. So what I would like to recommend is that we add a recommendation to this paper, which says that we recommend the Cabinet prioritises the balancing of the general fund rather than spending funds on political priorities. As an added recommendation.
Just to say, Chair, I'm highly confident we can do both, and this administration will do both. Thank you.
Can I just take views on whether members wish that recommendation? Well, first of all, are you actually formally proposing that?
Yes, I'd like to formally propose that. Yes.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Farquhar. Okay. All right. Democratic Services. I think we'll go straight to the vote on that.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I will read out the names of each member of the Overview and Scrutiny Board, and if you could respond with
Claire, just before you start, could you just repeat so we all understand exactly what we're voting on? Councillor Cox, can you just say what the additional recommendation is again?
The additional recommendation is that we recommend that the Cabinet prioritises the balancing of the general fund rather than spending funds on political priorities. If Councillor Mellor is able to obviously balance it, then that's fine, he can spend money, but if not, then he can't.
Okay, is everybody happy with that? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Could he just, sorry, Councillor Cox, can you just expand what you mean by political priorities? What exactly are you meaning by that phrase?
Well, Councillor Mellor has actually gone through and said he intends to spend significant amounts of money, into the millions, I believe, on his priorities, which are obviously political priorities. Now, the previous administration withdrew much of their political priorities in order to deal with the pandemic, and Councillor Mellor seems to have different priorities. So I would just wanted to reinforce that we should be prudent in terms of as a council, and therefore we shouldn't be spending money on these priorities until we're quite confident, absolutely confident that we can balance our budget.
Thank you. Councillor Farquhar, did you wish to add, or are you still just seconding, are you?
Absolutely. I'd like to add just on the second side of things. I was a little bit alarmed, Chair, that you plan to go straight to the vote without a debate on the motion to add the additional proposal. I must say that I myself particularly alarmed by the language which is being used by our portfolio holder for finance here, and I strongly support and will be voting for the recommendation to be more prudent, simply because language whereby you don't need to pay off debt for 40 years, I don't think anybody has got the vision whereby they can look 40 years into the future, and I'm very conscious of the fact that if we don't put a check in there, then we're doing a disservice to the prudence of public money which is placed in our trust to ensure that the balance sheet is actually balanced and it's prudently spent,
Okay,
and more importantly, prudently not borrowed against.
Well, of course, the full council does have a view on that because it has to approve the budget. So, Councillor Howell, oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Susan Zeiss, please. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, councillors. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, I'm the new Director Law and Governance and Monitoring Officer. I just wanted to add something to this debate in that I'm not sure that the recommendation as suggested right now is sufficiently clear enough to be understood by whoever wants to implement it. So if the intention is for it to be a recommendation to be prudent and to build up the general fund first before spending on any other priorities, I think that might be clearer. But I think just the phrase political priorities isn't clear enough for members of the public or officers who are interpreting and implementing this recommendation to understand, if I may add that to the debate.
Thank you very much. In view of that, Councillor Cox, do you wish to...
I'm very happy to take Susan's recommendations on that. So I'm quite happy to add the words she just mentioned, because that is precisely what I wanted.
Okay. Ms Johnson, are you happy with that? And Councillor Farquhar, I deem myself sufficiently chastised for not promoting a sufficient debate before I went to. The reason I've done that is because we've been on this for such a long time, and we do have to move on. So I beg your pardon. It's just one more speaker. We'll have one more speaker on this before we go to the vote on that. Councillor Howell.
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of the motion, I support this very much. The previous administration, of which a number of us were a part, was very prudent in its approach to finances and made a conscious decision to focus on keeping the council in a position where it would be best able to meet the consequences of the pandemic. The current administration, new administration, has already shown itself to be adopting a higher risk approach. I mean, that can be shown by the fact that they've recognised the income that the government has, in theory, promised us in relation to losses that we've made before we've actually received that money. You know, we could have done that as administration as well, but we were concerned that the government has a record of double and triple counting and not ultimately delivering on all its financial promises. So yeah, I think it's our approach as the Unity Alliance was a correct one, that we should be prudent, and I think this motion falls in line with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Councillor David Kelsin, you're definitely the last one to speak on this before we move to this vote.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that. Chairman, I will not be supporting this move or this motion to go forward. We are a new administration. They've had their chance and they did it their way. We are now going to give our administration a chance to do things, and I'm sure that we will get this right. I have every confidence that Councillor Mellor has thought this through, as I'm sure that Mr. Richins has as well. Otherwise, he would not be sitting here giving us the advice he has given us already this afternoon. So therefore, I, for one, will not support this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Kelsey. Claire Johnson, could you go ahead and vote now, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Before we go to the vote, can I just clarify that the amended recommendation is that the Overview and Scrutiny Board recommend to the council the balancing of the general fund before any other funding priorities.
I'm okay with that. I think Councillor Cox is nodding.
If anyone wants to dissent from that, please let me know.
Can we go a second? I think Councillor Farquhar was already seconded that. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we'll get to the vote, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll go on to the vote then. Just to clarify, I will call out each board member's name, starting with the chair and vice chair. And if you could respond with for, against or abstain, please. So, Councillor Bartlett.
Against.
Councillor O'Neill.
Against.
Councillor Cox.
For.
Councillor Davies.
Against.
Councillor Dion.
Against.
Councillor Edwards.
Against.
Councillor Farquhar.
For, and I'd like my vote recorded for the minutes, please.
Okay. Councillor Farr.
Against. Thank you.
Councillor Fear.
Against.
Councillor Hall.
Against.
Councillor Howell.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
Against.
Councillor Rigby.
For.
Councillor Trent.
For.
And Councillor Slade.
For.
Chairman, that's 6 votes in favour and 9 votes against.
So that recommendation is not carried. And I think this now brings this debate to a conclusion. We've had a really good go at it. And so the paper goes through to Cabinet with recommendations as stated on the paper. I'd like to move on now to agenda item 10, development of the Overview and Scrutiny Board. And I'd like to invite Susan Zeiss to give us a little talk on this. I'm not quite sure what's behind this one exactly, but I think maybe she can enlighten us.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not going to really give you a talk so much as to ask you to think about a few things before the date that we have scheduled in our calendars for the next Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting, which is the 16th of November. That meeting was put in the calendars in case there was business that councillors wanted to attend to then, but it appears now to be possibly surplus to requirements unless we use it for this particular purpose that I'm going to outline in a minute, because we have another board scheduled for the 7th of December, which will be before the next Cabinet meeting. So in my role as incoming monitoring officer, I've been having a look at overview and scrutiny and taking views from various officers and members. And I also understand that through the local government reform process, you had some support from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, previously known as the Centre for Public Scrutiny, and that they are scheduled to come and do a review with members. We've also had a change in makeup of the meeting, so I thought it might be a good idea for us to have a look at how scrutiny is running, whether we want to pay some attention to our work plan, because what did look a little light to me in coming from other authorities was not the forward plan so much, but the sort of ongoing work plan of what business scrutiny members wanted to have a look at, both by way of overview and by way of scrutiny. And sometimes it's difficult to do that in the cut and thrust of a meeting or just by sending emails in. It often helps to sit together as a group and think through what you might want to suggest and put it into a program. So all I was going to say was, would members like to use that 2 o'clock in the afternoon slot of the 16th of November to have another bit of training stroke intervention stroke review stroke conversation with Mr. Ed Hammond from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, and also to consider putting together more of a robust and going further forward work plan.
Thank you very much. And I think we will be coming on to the dates for future meetings later on, but and it does appear that, you know, the 16th of November could be an ideal opportunity for us to get together informally as a board to discuss the way ahead and what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve, and hopefully to bring in some of the more broader issues that you know, the overview side of our work we hopefully can do. To be fair, when we think back, you know, to LGR and the huge effort that we've had to put through in terms of policy and papers from the officers, it's been enormous, and it's not surprising that it's been driven by what's going into cabinet as much as it's going to full council as well. So it's always difficult because some of those decisions have been huge, and you know, it's probably rightly that it has gone to scrutiny, but it would be nice to think that we can broaden out the scope a bit to get what members want to put in front of the board. So hopefully it's a laudable aim, I guess, but in practice, whether we could be able to spare the time to do that, well, let's try at least. You know, let's try to do it. I think Councillor Vicky Slade has got wishes to speak on it. Councillor Slade.
Thank you. I feel very strongly that we need to have some fresh training on this because more than half of the members of the Overview and Scrutiny Board have changed. Obviously, the chair and vice chair have both changed. I want it on record that for the last 18 months, the way that Overview and Scrutiny has behaved towards the members of the administration has been bordering on bullying at times, and that shouldn't have been happening. And we need to be really clear about how we get that right so that we are scrutinising and challenging in a really robust way, but that it doesn't step over the line. And I think external support is really useful for that. I would also just want to add that if we are looking at the 16th, I would like to call for us to go back to what Overview and Scrutiny were doing during the period of the first wave of COVID, in actually asking for an update from the leader and presumably also the portfolio holder. Now they have a COVID portfolio holder, and the chief exec around the impact of COVID on council services. It feels appropriate if we have that spare meeting that we put that in there as well, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Okay. I think, you know, the meeting, as I see it, on the 16th can be an informal discussion between all of us and to thrash out what we would like to address, and that would obviously be one of them. Yeah,
what I was going to say was, in theory, we have 2 meetings on that day. So potentially, if you wanted to do the informal one in the afternoon in terms of training and development and what the board looks at in the future, you could keep the evening one so that the public can actually get this, the same scrutiny we had on COVID that we've had for the last 6 months. That feels like an appropriate space for it.
Well, we'll be discussing the forward plan in a minute. So that may be an opportunity for that, I guess. We'll have to see what other members think about that. So, I mean, just that, I think, Councillor Fear, you've put your hand up. Did you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't know if you want to go Susan first, to just come back on Councillor Slade, if you prefer to do that, and then come back to me.
Okay, fine. Thank you, Susan. You're muted. Can't hear you.
You know, that's terrible. I shouldn't have done that. Sorry. Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to say that what I'm omitted to say in the very beginning was, yes, this session would not be one that was open to the public, the training and development session. Thank you.
Yeah, that's understood. I think what Councillor Slade was suggesting, because we generally been having these two very long ONS sessions, because of the cancellation of the cabinet meeting essentially in November, that we could still use that opportunity, although we don't have an agenda for that meeting. We could potentially use the evening meeting for an opportunity to brief through the committee and and therefore through to the public on what's going on with COVID. And has anybody else got any views on that? You want to come back first of all, Councillor Fear?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor raised a really good point of new training, not just new members, but I think it's always good for members such as myself to go in and for that training as well. So we're all up to scratch on the most recent developments on that. I think it's needed. Obviously, we're looking at the way some members today have been scrutinising. It definitely needs to have that scope. I feel a little bit abashed that Councillor Slade felt that the Overview Scrutiny Board over the past few months has been on the verge of bullying. I wish she would have said that at the time, because the last thing I would have wanted is to sit on a panel that that made her feel that uncomfortable, because that's not what we're here for. We're here to scrutinise and overview. So I'm just saddened that we wouldn't have been able to address her views on that sooner. But hopefully going forward with the new flock that we have now, we can all come up to scratch on how to get the best out of this meeting. And also I think on the 16th it would be really good because of looking at the overview side. Because we definitely have some ideas between the members of this board on what we should look at all three borough-wide for the conurbation going forward, especially in the fact that going into next year, when we've left the European Union, there's going to be changes of certain legislation that could impact us. Okay. And it's down to us to feed to the cabinet to then feed to government. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Chris Rigby, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was coming in along similar lines. I think that the training session would be really beneficial, but I'd also like to request that we could actually open this up further to include all members. With these meetings having been afternoon and evening meetings, we tend to have a lot of substitutes coming onto this board. And I feel that it'd be really beneficial for particularly people who often substitute in to get the same kind of training, which the formal board members are as well. Thanks.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm personally up for that. I don't know, anybody else got a view on that? Yeah, Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea, Chair. As we know, as Councillor Rigby has quite rightly just said, there are afternoon and evening meetings. Not everyone can make both meetings, and the board is subject to a lot of changes from everybody. And I think if the whole council were invited for this, it would be better for everyone. We'd have consistency in the way that everyone thinks going forward.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Trent, sorry. It says your hand is up, but I do not see it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think also the meeting of the 16th ought to take account of what I hope is going to be a constructive discussion tomorrow about where we see the council's organisation going, because I believe that scrutiny is a weakness of this, and I believe that the problem lies in the current system was set up by the preceding authorities, and I suspect there were assumptions about the way it was going to go and who was going to be running it, and I think it was, maximum efficiency, minimum attendance, and it was keep members in the background sort of thing. And And I think that it was apparent during that time that the process was flawed. And I do think that, and you know, one of the concerns that has been raised over recent months has been the lack of engagement by members, backbench members, or whatever you like to call it, in what's happening in the council. And I do really think that we should be thinking about that. And I think actually the discussion on the 16th could be a very helpful way of identifying how to improve the way this works, because to me, the Scrutiny Committee shouldn't be a baseball bat to beat the administration with. It obviously has that role in some respects, because it's the only voice that the opposition, whatever the opposition is at the time, has. But I do think that it's been a very negative part of what we've been doing in recent times. As I say, I joined the Overview and Scrutiny Board comparatively recently, and sort of left it even more recently, sort of thing. But I found it very frustrating, having chaired a scrutiny way back in the old Borough of Poole days, and knowing how that was constructed and how we sort of tried to get in amongst things and develop members' knowledge and understanding. I really think that we ought to look at how we do improve things. And as I say, so I think taking account of what comes out of tomorrow's meeting would also be an important part of this meeting. And I think the invite should be wider than just the members. I think anyone who wishes to sit in on it and make a contribution, I think it would be very useful.
Okay, I mean, welcome your input. And one thing I was going to ask was if members would like, because as I see it, there would probably need to be two elements to our meeting on the 16th. One is to actually discuss as a board, you know, how we're going to take it forward. And whilst we'll accept inputs to that, but we've actually got to structure something as well, if we can. I know it links into the forward plan, but you know, we've got a job to do as well. I'd just like, before I go to you, Susan, unless it's about the same thing, about Councillor Slade's view about putting a meeting on in the evening, almost primarily to address the COVID situation. Is that something that members are comfortable with or not? Please say. Thank you. No one seems to be very enthusiastic on that.
Copes with that element of it, and it separates it from the afternoon meeting, as you say, which is more general discussion.
We could, you know, we could certainly put, we're going to be discussing the forward plan in a minute, but we could certainly put the COVID thing on the plan for the 7th of December. But maybe you think that's too late. Councillor Slade? Can't hear you.
Sorry, I was just saying the 7th of December, in theory, the second lockdown will be over by then. I think the public need to hear what's happening locally in the council formally, as they did throughout the whole of the first thing. I know it was stopped in September because it was felt we were returning to business as usual, but I think the public need the opportunity to be part of this too.
Okay.
And we do normally have 2 meetings, so it should be in everyone's diary to have the afternoon and evening. That's the commitment of being on ONS, I would have thought.
Yeah, of course, but we do have the briefings now coming from the portfolio holder, as we had to the public this week.
With respect, throughout the whole of COVID, you had all of those briefings anyway. So I don't see that there's, you know, any different. Why would we not scrutinise something now? I'm quite happy if you want to take it to a vote. I just think it's a bit strange that we would stop scrutinising something when it comes back.
Okay, Ms. Ice. You're muted again. Can't hear you.
It's this thing of taking down a hand and turning off mute at the same time. I obviously can't multitask. I'm very sorry. Obviously, officers will support whatever members want, but I just wondered, with the interface with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, it often helps to have a slightly smaller group, so there's the opportunity for questions and an interaction with the trainer. So I just thought I'd put that in there for you to consider when you're deciding what format this should take, and so that I can brief that person on the scope, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if we could do it on the 16th. We could do it in 2 sessions effectively. If I have a broader group, we have a broader group for the first half, and then maybe the board in the second half of the session. If that would, do you think that?
Absolutely, Chair. And then we could do the forward plan in the smaller group as well, the work plan in the smaller group. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kelsey.
I've just had my thunder stolen by Susan. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Rigby.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to come in and say on the 16th, I'd really support a scrutiny panel with a formal meeting just focusing on COVID. I think if we knew where we would be today with the announcements which have been made, it'd certainly be on the agenda for one of these 2 meetings. I believe that leaving it until December would be a bit too late, realistically, and we should have it on every agenda going forward until the situation dramatically changes.
Okay. Now, I actually am in favour of this, and I would like to see it in the evening meeting, and that would, as I see it, be the only item on the agenda at the moment. Well, I think there's no one else wanting to speak, so I'm going to draw this item to a close now. We've had a bit of a flash around with it, and it brings us on actually to item 11, the forward plan. Yeah, so I think there's no dissent. I guess from the suggestion that we have a COVID meeting on the 16th. There's no dissent from that. Okay, so that's agreed then. Brings us to the forward plan, and yeah, it's a bit thin at the moment, isn't it? And although having said that, I do note that the Cabinet forward panel, the agenda for the next meeting, I think, on the, when is it, in December, December the 16th or whatever it was, there's a suggested list of topics that will be presented, but the agenda has not been formally published. And what I'm going to suggest is that on the 16th, when we have our informal meeting, that we actually agree the agenda for our next ONS meeting on that afternoon. Is everybody happy with that? In the meantime, what I would really appreciate is if members could think about the overview aspects of overview and scrutiny and give me their thoughts before that day, so we can sort of have some kind of idea of what we want to discuss, and sort of get some of those ideas on the table, and maybe we could put 1 or 2 of those thoughts on for our meeting later on the 7th of December. One thing I would say, of course, is that the 16th of November, it wouldn't leave officers time enough to produce papers, etc., for the December the 7th meeting for us. So it might be that we'll come up with ideas that will have to come to a subsequent meeting, if you see what I mean. I think time is a bit short for that. But looking at the numbers of items that are on the Cabinet agenda, there's a really meaty load of subjects that are due to come up on the Cabinet meeting before Christmas. So I think we've got, there's plenty of stuff in there, and we may have to choose from that Cabinet agenda, I'm afraid. Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I understand that the full forward plan is due to be published tomorrow, which won't just obviously cover what's going to be on for December, but if it works like the forward plan did before, it'll tell us what's proposed for anything up to 6 or 8 months ahead, which I think will really help us to get that overview bit in, because we could be looking at what papers we might want to influence that are coming forward next year. So if everyone can commit to having a proper look at that, then on the 16th that will give us, and obviously you'll be asked to choose the items. So will you contact, well, once the papers are issued, do you want us all to contact you with the things we'd like to see scrutinised for December, separately from then a more longer term view to talk about on the 16th.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, no, good idea. In fact, that was something that was in the back of my mind that I forgot to mention. But yes, absolutely. All right, then. I mean, I'm just looking quickly at the forward plan. Is there's anything for me to look at? Oh yes, on our own work plan, looking forward, there are a couple of things on there that, for example, some of the commissioning work that we've done that maybe we ought to just mention. Well, the work on item 6, I don't know if you've got it in front of you, but on the forward plan, item 6, we've got the working group, organisational development and estates and accommodation strategy. Now, I think the action was, well, a working group was going to be set up to address this, but I'm not quite sure if that's still necessary, given that we are now going to have a separate estates strategy paper produced. And also it's gets subsumed into the transformation agenda in form of that new asset strategy. Any thoughts on that, Claire? Sorry.
I just wanted to say, Chairman, that there was a working group set up on that, and it did meet just before lockdown. Obviously, since then, the situation has changed significantly in terms of transformation.
Yeah. I'm not sure that we do need that board to continue. Has anybody got any views on that? No, okay. We've got a paper on what's going to be happening now to the new civic centre in Bournemouth. We're going to be looking at that later. And you know, the other we've heard what Councillor Mellor has said about, you know, they're working up ideas for the other estates. So I think it's probably too early. I think we should reconvene that board if and when it's needed a bit later on. So unless anybody dissents from that, shall we go with that? Okay, there's no dissent, so we'll take that off for the time being. Item 7, the working group BH Life provision of leisure services. Well, we're going to be hearing about that later on, and I think the working group has essentially finished its work, and we'll be we're hearing from Councillor Iyengar later. So I think that one, for the time being, has now done its job, so we can close that one down. Item 8, the working group for the economy and tourism, the impact of COVID-19. That was a working group was going to be set up. I'm not sure if it has actually been constituted, but I think it ought to stay there for the time being. I think we do need to bring that one back, so I'll leave it on the list. Pay and reward strategy, item 9. I think scrutiny of cabinet report and invitation. Well, at some stage that pay strategy will come forward, and we will be looking at it. I think we can probably just leave that on there. Lansdowne digital pilot at item 10. Yes, we undertook to, I think, record the test levels that were going to be emitted from the antennas. So I think we undertook to do that and to let the public know what they were going to be. So that should stay on there. Item 11, the Poole Town Centre Master Plan. I'm not sure what's happening with that, but I think we should just leave it there for the moment. Item 12, acquisition and compulsory purchase order, CPO strategy. And somebody wanted this on there, and I think that should stay on there for the time being. Item 13, review of leisure centre management. That's a very important thing for the future. I think we'll leave that there. Tricuro. Tricuro to consider the partnership arrangements and in particular the overall business case for the company. This one I would have thought would have been subject to the Health and Adult Social Care and Overview Scrutiny Committee. I'm not sure that this particular area is for this ONS to address. Anybody got any views on that? I see Councillor Mark Howell, your hand is up.
Yeah, it was in an earlier item in relation to the economy and tourism group.
Yeah. Okay. Shall I just finish then and we come back to it?
Yeah.
Okay. And the last one is green credentials, an annual report on the council's progress to assess our performance against targets. And I know that there is a report coming through in the new year, I believe, for that. So that stays there, and we await the report, and it'll no doubt come for some vigorous scrutiny whenever it gets on the agenda. Councillor Howes.
Yes, I'm not sure exactly of the the background to the creation of the proposed working group on COVID impact, economy and tourism, but I mean I assume that it's pretty obvious from the name. What I would say is that during my time as portfolio holder for the economy, the discussions moved on very much to the future in terms of recovery, and there was one working group set up to look at to envisage what the conurbation ought to really look like in 2030 in terms of the economy. I'm very much aware that the LEP has been going through a similar process of trying to envision the future and reposition itself and market itself so it can market itself effectively to government and others. So I think as a scrutiny board, we need to be looking at the future and monitoring and getting involved in that process of envisioning the future. Shouldn't just be limited to looking at history, which it suggests that the title suggests at the moment it is.
Okay, Councillor Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, is it within this group's remit to look at the local plan when that is coming out to sort of scrutinise that, just as a one to go on the forward plan, if as I say, it's within our remit to do that?
I think undoubtedly it will be, yes, absolutely. It's a very, very important document for the whole conurbation, so I'm sure it will. Yeah. Okay, anybody else? Well, I think we've probably done that then. So forward plan, we'll string this together at our meeting on the 16th. That's agenda item number 12 is our meeting dates, which are listed apparently. They're not on my notes here, but go on, what page is it on? Oh, can't find it. Has anybody got the list of meeting dates in front of them? Oh, here we go. Well, we've talked about the 16th of November. Anybody got any problems with the other dates that have been listed? No. Okay, and I think Claire was going to come back to me regarding the 1st of April, which is listed, just to confirm that that is the date we're going to use.
Yes, Chairman, I can confirm that date is out of the normal sequence of dates for the ONS board. It's on a Thursday, but that is due to fitting in with the publication dates for the Cabinet agenda due to the Easter bank holidays.
Okay, thank you. Right, that now I think concludes the public part of the meeting. Sorry
to butt in. Could we just ensure that that Thursday date does not clash with a planning board date, please?
It didn't when I looked at it this afternoon, Councillor Kelsey.
Thanks, Chairman.
Yeah, okay. I think now we're subject to agreement of the board. We'll be moving into a private session where the press and the public are excluded. Could I revert to Claire Johnson to read out the requisite notice, please?
Chairman, yes, the board are asked to agree the following resolution: that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 in Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in withholding the information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. So that's with reference to the feedback from the working group on the BH Live leisure services.
Thank you, Claire. Do I have the board's agreement that we go into closed session? Yes, thank you very much. In which case, can I thank all members of the public that have been watching this meeting this afternoon. We will be meeting again for more agenda items for overview and scrutiny at 6 o'clock this evening, and hopefully we'll see you back then. But for the time being, can I thank you very much for looking in this afternoon and your interest in this group. And for the rest of the meeting, there are no more public items. And so for the public part of the meeting, I'll now close it, there being only one more item to discuss on the agenda. So thank you very much. Democratic Services, if you could now finish the live feed, and we'll move into under the line discussion. Thank you.